2007 was when I was diagnosed. I was 34. I had a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old. Um, I was on a cruise with friends, and the second to last day of the cruise, I had a almost what felt like an electric shock going down my spine when I looked down. So every time I would look to the ground, or I would, any movement in my neck, in my spinal area, I would get an electric shock. And I knew in that moment something was wrong. But we were with 30 friends and it was a big cruise. And I said something to my husband, but nothing more came of it. The next day on the flight home, my feet, Pam, were so cold on the airplane that they couldn't get enough blankets. My husband kept saying, "Can you bring more blankets?" My feet were so cold that I couldn't feel them. I just knew they were cold. So that's when the tingling began in my feet, and it climbed all the way up my legs, all the way up to my rib cage, stopped at my rib cage. And within a couple of days, I felt like a 500-pound man was sitting on me. It felt like I was being crushed. So that led me to the ER. That led me to fear, to anxiety. I didn't know what was wrong with me. Um, I felt like because I felt like I was being crushed, I couldn't breathe, but I knew I wasn't. So there was definitely something wrong, and I knew that. Then the tingling went into my hands, and then it kind of stopped there. Fatigue set in, but over the course of, I guess, about 2 or 3 weeks, when I had all the appointments, I had an MRI, I had a spinal tap. I asked them to check for Lyme disease, and they ruled that out. Though now that I'm in the program, I have some symptoms of Lyme. And I know there's not good testing for it, nor is there good testing really for any parasites. But I went ahead and they diagnosed me with transverse myelitis. So that was the first indication that I had MS. Um, they sent me home, but they told me before so that you'll have to go on medication. You'll be on medication the rest of your life. And we suggest that you join a MS support group of some sort. But just we want to, warn you that they'll all be in wheelchairs. So I immediately got a second opinion, and I went within our health and I got a second opinion. I got a better doctor, and I liked my neurologist, but he shortly retired. And so he's been gone for years and years and years. But when you have a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old, and they tell you you're going to be in a wheelchair, and your husband will be taking care of you, and I won't be able to be a mother and live my vocation as a wife and a mother, fear sets in, and it's scary when you're 34 and you have your whole life ahead of you. So I went on the immunosuppressive drugs. I thought there was no other help for me except that. So I was on that for 16 years. And finally, a year ago, after COVID and after I knew something was wrong and I knew something was going on, and I knew we were being, I guess I would say I knew that we weren't being told the truth. For the first time, I didn't trust our politicians, our government, and I just knew there was more. And so that was when I started looking into big pharma. And I realized I've been on this medication for 16 years, and I don't even know what's in it. We were taught to trust our doctors. And so then the research began. So that was kind of the beginning of how my journey started, but that was 16, 17 years ago. Then my dad passed, and that had a big effect on me, of course. And when I learned about parasites and about how our energy and our stress and everything that affects what they do inside us, I realized that the stress of my dad's death and taking care of him probably had a big impact on why my previous MRI showed 2 new lesions. But I didn't have any new symptoms, but I had 2 new lesions on my brain, and I was devastated. So that kind of began my journey into discovering what was happening in the world at the beginning of COVID. And I had my dad's good friend had a couple of the vaccines, realized what was going on, and he started sending me research on parasites. And he said, "Have you ever heard of parasites and MS?" And I said, "No, I haven't." So he began sending me tons of information. And then I found Jim Humble. I found Jim Humble, and I was telling you about, I tried to do CD before I came across you, and it did not work. I had Herxheimer reactions. I had to stop and wait and try again because and that was part of my discovery into we haven't been told the whole truth. Then I found Matthew Embry, which is also a fellow Canadian, and I found his cookbook. So I ordered his cookbook and I started eating better, and I started, there were some things that you don't necessarily agree with what his cookbook applies, but I thought, so I started that, and that was okay, but I didn't see any improvement. I didn't see any change in what I was doing. So that's kind of how my journey began. My dad's best friend sent me an email and said, "Check this out about MS and parasites," but there was no link. So I emailed him back and I said, "Mac, there's nothing there. Can you resend it again?" He couldn't find it. He said, "Just do a Google search and type in MS and parasites." Pam, you were the third person down when I was searching. And I just came across livediseasefree.com. And I thought, live disease, and I clicked on it, and that was 6 months ago, and I am a completely different woman now. I can't even I think about who I was 6 months ago, and I remember my phone call with you, and I remember sitting on my bed thinking, what am I about to do? This is crazy. I'm going to have a mess my whole life. And I've just accepted it, and I've just accepted the fatigue, and I've accepted it, and I've learned to live with it. And then I remember sitting down with you, and I hung the phone, and I knew that God had brought me here in this moment, and he's known from all time that this is how I would be healed, because I've always known he would heal me, but I didn't know how. And it's 17 years later, and I'm sitting here with tears in my eyes because I think I'm symptom free. And I think, how did that happen in 6 months when I've had this for 17 years? It's crazy. It's crazy. So that was kind of the beginning of my journey, and to now. So some of my symptoms, it started out with the transverse myelitis. I ended up going on IV steroids, which I look back now and I hated. They got the inflammation down, and from that point on, it really was my biggest battle the last 17 years has been chronic fatigue. I get tingling, I overheat, I get severe heaviness in my limbs and my arms and my legs, and just to the point of um, I collapse. At the end of the day, it's like I just collapse. My body just kind of gives out. And people don't understand when you say you have chronic fatigue, they don't, because I'm not in a wheelchair, and because people don't know I have MS. And so from the outside, nobody knows. So interiorly, I had a girlfriend recently, Pam, that just said, "I've known you your whole life, and I never knew how much you were suffering." Because you don't go to gatherings and talk about, you go and you give it your all, virtuously, and then you leave and you come home and you collapse, and your family gets to, deal with it. But I think chronic fatigue was the worst of my symptoms. That was the hardest, but I had a lot of tingling. I have floaters in my eyes, which I'm still treating. Um, but it was mainly tingling when I overheated, the heaviness in my arms and my legs. My knees tend to almost want to give out on me at times. I'll be walking and a knee just kind of, I've never fallen, but I drop things occasionally. Sometimes I'm just holding something and it just drops. But not a lot. But chronic fatigue is the worst symptom, or the worst thing that I've dealt with. And I've tried to explain to my kids and my husband and friends and family that saying, the expression, "you feel like you've been hit by a truck," unless you've ever experienced fatigue, and you have, Pam, people don't understand. They think she's tired. So in the morning, I would sleep 8 hours, sometimes 9 at the beginning. And when I woke up, I would go in to brush my teeth, and I would have to sit down on the toilet to brush my teeth because I couldn't hold my body up. Or I would have to lean over on the sink while brushing my teeth and hold myself up while brushing because I didn't have, and this is at 7 o'clock in the morning when I've just slept 8 hours. And so I knew in the mornings what my day was going to look like. And that was really the last 17 years. And I think I got used to it. And so there were some good things that came out of COVID and everything because it made me really look into what was happening in the world, but also to look at myself and to, do you want to live with this your whole life? Do you want to be the grandparent? I have a 22 and a 25-year-old now. Do you want to be the grandparent at the park catching them, or do you want to be sitting, in your wheelchair in the back? And I think on one of your talks on your website, and don't quote me, but I heard somewhere that the lifespan of a person with MS is 25 years from their diagnosis. So I thought that means I have 8 years left. And I was not okay with that. And so it's just been the last 3 years have been a journey just to the truth, and a lot of different truths, because I think one of the greatest successes I've had is probably my life feels more ordered and structured. I feel like I'm 50 and I'm living my best life. And I think some of the first things that, going back to starting the diet when I first began, it was a headache for a couple of days. As you said, you're going to have a headache from the caffeine. After a couple of days, and after my family kind of decided that, they weren't sure about the program, but they supported me. But I think they had a lot of doubts. And I think now they're finally going, oh my gosh, she was right. She was right. And so from the beginning, a slight headache, the diet, Pam, it's interesting because when I first read it, I kind of went, how is this going to work with my family? Are they going to join me? Are they not? And you said, oh, don't worry. They usually come along when they start seeing like, oh, and it actually tastes good. So I've never eaten poorly, but I've never eaten as well as I could have. And so this diet has changed my life, and I haven't looked back. I will never go back to the way I used to eat because I feel too good. When you feel this good after feeling the way I had for 17 years, you can't go back. So I don't miss any of those foods. I don't miss the sugar. I don't miss the chocolate. I don't miss the caffeine. I don't miss the wine. I don't miss the alcohol. I don't miss any of it because I know what was then and I know what is now. So I think implementing the diet, the first thing that people said to me was, your skin, what are you doing to your skin? And I hadn't changed anything. And so there was almost like a glow. I had a friend say, my dad's friend say, you almost have a glow to you, and I think it was just implementing for the first time, I think in 17 years, I had hope. I had this hope that I was going to be healed. And it was a hope that never was lost, but I felt like it had been buried and that I had just kind of succumb to I'll always have MS, and that's just how it's going to be. So this hope was kind of uprooted when I met you. And that was when I realized that it's not just the diet. It's a lot of things combined. It's faith, it's trust in God, it's what we put into our bodies. And then it's all the other great stuff, right? That we got to add to it, the parasite drugs and the CD and all the other things that I learned. But the last thing for me, and about 2 months into and I may be jumping all over the place, but about 2 months into treating, and I think I emailed you, and I probably sounded like a little baby, but I emailed you because I had been treating for 2 months. I passed parasites and worms, so I knew I was on the right. I passed them so early on. I knew that I had them, and I knew this was the program for me. But about 2 months into treating, I still had the fatigue. And so that was not, and I just kept thinking, okay, this is what has to go, and this is the last thing that needs to go in order for me to know that this has worked and that it's that I'm done and that it's. And so I remember being on one of my walks with a dog, and all of a sudden I could feel, um, I think I described it in my emails to you as pep in my step. And I felt like a teenager walking again. And so, again, all these years, I base everything on, in the morning, do I have to sit down to brush my teeth? On my walks, am I, walking slow? Am I only going because I have a dog and the dog needs to be walked? If I didn't have a dog, would I even be going because I'm too tired? And so I knew that that was one of the biggest indicators that things are working, because there used to be a stop along the way where I would have to sit with the dog on this guy had some raised um, planks, and I would sit there in the shade for at least 5 minutes. And one day the window was open. I didn't realize it. And he said, "Oh, hello." And he startled me. And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just taking a little break. I hope you don't mind that I'm sitting here." But I physically couldn't get up. So it wasn't, I was just waiting for a shady spot to sit down, to regain my strength, to be able to get back home. And that was 2 months ago, Pam. And it's hot where we live. So that was probably 85, 90-degree weather. But all of a sudden, I remember coming into my prayer room, sitting down, and I remember I just cried. And I cried and I cried and I cried. And I just said, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to feel this way anymore. And I feel like that was a pivotal moment when God heard me and he heard my cry. And I think it was like the next day, Pam, I woke up and I was walking a little quicker, and I felt, and then within a week, and I was still treating and still treating and still following the protocol, not cheating. And my family was like, don't you want to have a little bite? You can have a little bite. And I wouldn't, because it's like, no, if I'm going to do this, I have to do it. And I have been, I think it's now 6 weeks, 5 or 6 weeks. I have not had any fatigue at all. None. So I am, as I've told you, I am painting. I've painted almost my entire house. I've gone up to our cabin and I painted the kitchen. And I think the paint for me, I've always loved to paint, but I think the paint for me, it's a fresh start. It's a new beginning. It's new life. It's a different, and I think I associate some of the old colors with my mood and how I was back then when I painted 8 years ago. So the colors were a little darker, and now my house is white and it's bright. And I think it does have to do with the state that I'm in and how I'm feeling. And so I have been on a painting spree. I'm a painting fool. I can't stop because I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and I'm not going to feel, I'm going to have I've been hit by a truck, and I haven't. So here I am. Yeah, and I'm feeling great. I decided to join the Live Disease Free plan primarily because nothing else had worked. So the 16 years on immunosuppressive drugs hadn't worked. And 16 years, 17 years, I'm still physically exhausted. And I just think after, as I mentioned and touched on, pardon me, after COVID, I think the discovery into the truth about healthcare, big pharma, all of those things, they were disturbing to think that, and I almost felt, which I think everybody has, and I know especially you being the one who researches and teaches all this, you feel betrayed almost, that we put our trust in these doctors and these healthcare professionals, and some are very good. And some were taught this. They never were taught the truth. And so this is all they know. But I think for me, it was a wanting to live in the truth in every aspect of my life. And so that goes with your health, with your spiritual life. It's with everything. I wanted to live in the truth. And so it almost sounded too good to be true. Like when my dad's friend said parasites and MS, I'm like, come on, nobody, and you don't want to believe it, but it's almost those things which are too hard to believe that you go, oh, okay, there's something there because no one's talking about it. It's not in the media. Therefore, it probably there's a catch. And so for me, it was, it really was a journey. For the first time, Pam, I felt like being, I stayed at home most of my kids had me at home most of their elementary years. And so when I finally went back to work, there was something about going back when they were old enough and I felt like it's time for me. And my years working were great. And when my dad got sick 3 years ago, that's when I decided I want to take care of him. I need to do this. And I haven't gone back to work since. And if I will, I'm not sure yet. But one thing I can say is that for the first time, I felt like Amy was focusing on Amy because as wives and mothers, we tend to everything, our hearts and souls go into our family. And so for me, it was the first time I felt like, okay, my kids are 22 and 25. My husband's semi-retired. I need to focus on me. And so there were hours my family would kind of come in my prayer room, they'd look in there and they'd wave and I'd go, I'm still doing research, and your name, Pam, has become a household name. My best friend from childhood, from my youth, is named Pam. Now when I say Pam, they know which Pam I'm talking about. It's Pam Bartha. But the funny thing is that recently I was talking about my girlfriend from my youth, and I said, oh yeah, Pam's in Australia. And my daughter said, why is Pam is she researching in Australia? What is she doing there? And I go, oh, wrong Pam. So for me, as I'm sure it is for all students of yours, I just wanted to have the truth and I wanted to live in it and I wanted to experience normalcy because I haven't remembered, I haven't sensed it in a long time. Because when you don't feel well, you lose out on a lot. And so for me, it was a matter of discovering the truth amidst all the lies that we were being told, amidst all, and then finding you. And there was a knowing in my mind after I talked with you for the first time, after I did the research, there was a knowing that God had led me to you. And there was a knowing that this was what I was to do. So that's kind of what made me pull the trigger and say, I'm doing it. I'm doing it. I'm so glad I did, Pam. I don't know where I would be. Well, I do know where I would be, and it wouldn't be where I am now. And it's just been, you know, passing parasites and checking for them. And it's like this is not who I was 6 months ago, but I like who it is now because I'm looking out after me and how I live my life affects everybody around me. And so it's just been nice to discover the truth and discover what God designs for me in that truth. So it's been a blessing. Yeah, it's been a blessing. Probably the biggest thing I've learned is I never knew, Pam, and it's funny and I'm almost embarrassed to say that I understood what MS was, but I never really understood it because what they give you and what you look up online, there's never any mention of infections. And I knew of inflammation, but I didn't know what the infections were caused from. I didn't know about silent infections. So I think understanding silent infections, how they work in a person's body, how you can look completely healthy on the outside, but inside, I never knew about dysbiosis. I mean your plan and how you have it laid out and all of your questionnaires, diving into your family history, calling my mom, there were times where I'd call and then I'd hang up and I'd call 10 minutes later and she'd go, yes, because she knew it was another question. Okay, mom, think back. Do you remember if I had, but it was really, again, that was all kind of part of the discovery of learning how I got here, that it starts with our mothers. I mean, it can start from birth in the womb. And so I think learning the process of dysbiosis and how it works and learning how gluten and dairy affect a person, the blood-brain barrier, silent infections, inflammation, and how that leads to chronic disease, and So that for me was a huge takeaway because now I'm passing that on to my kids. My daughter, who still lives at home, she's taking it in and she's on the path. She's like, Mom, we've got to get rid of our water system is not okay. So for Christmas, she's getting me a new water system. We have a Brita, and it's not cutting it. So she said, Mom, I'm getting you a water system for Christmas. So they're learning so they can take it, in their lives for their families. So I think my biggest takeaway is what I've learned, because knowledge is power. And when we have that knowledge, right, as you said, which is given by God, when we have that, then we can act. And so without that knowledge, I was settling. I was just settling with where I was. And so your program really was the first hope for me. And I knew in my heart that this is where God was leading me. And as I mentioned earlier, Pam, I always felt like I knew God was going to heal me, but I never knew how. And here I'm thinking 17 years later, where's Pam been? But it's because it's the censorship, right? And so of course it's not the first thing out there that you're going to find when you go on to do a Google search. So for me, I think it was, yeah, it was discovering how the body works and what is happening within it for this to happen to me, for me to have chronic fatigue. And I'm grateful to God that I feel so bad sometimes when I see people who are severely disabled and in wheelchairs and using walkers, because I've never gotten to that point. But the one thing I don't feel like I ever lost was hope, because when you lose that, you lose that zeal for life. And so I felt like, though, as I said earlier, I kind of felt like it had just been suppressed a little, like it was always there because of my faith, but it was suppressed. And then your program kind of opened up that reality for me again, to realize that I'm worthy to be healed and I'm going to be healed. But I'll tell you what, Pam, there have been times though where it hasn't been an easy road. There were times where I just thought, oh my gosh, or when you think you're going to see something in the toilet and you see nothing. And you think, and there was a couple of months where I saw nothing. And I'm like, no fair. Everybody else is seeing something. I want to see something, but the weekly calls also were a huge benefit for me, because I did have a couple of friends who were great. They were great support groups. And I had one who she would always joke, and I think I shared this with you. She'd always say, have you passed the 30-incher yet? And I would never show her the pictures. I would never send them to her on my phone because I didn't want pictures coming from, but I would always, whenever I would see her, that was the first thing I would do. She'd say, I want to see him. I want to see him. I want to see him. So she knows about it now, so it's just about getting the word out and slowly spreading it so people understand that there's so much more out there than what we've been told. When I was newly diagnosed and I had just gotten off the IV steroids, and I remember being home. My daughter was in kindergarten, and I remember being home, and I remember looking in the mirror in my bathroom. And I think I may have shared this with you early on. I remember looking in the mirror and I remember not recognizing myself, because that old Amy was gone. The Amy I knew was gone. And I remember looking at myself and I remember saying into the mirror, I reintroduced myself to myself. And I said, my name is Amy and I have multiple sclerosis. And I repeated it over and over and over, because there was you don't want to accept it, but I wanted to move on. If this was going to be I wanted to move on so I could be a wife and a mother and live my vocation. And so I remember in that moment, I started to cry and I fell on my knees in my bathroom. And I remember giving, and I don't remember how I said it exactly, but I remember that moment surrendering my life to God and giving it to Him, because I no longer had control, because I had something I didn't want. And I had something that I could have, what the doctors were telling me I would have for the rest of my life. And so I remember surrendering and giving my life to God. And so in a special way, I do feel like my the time I spend in prayer, I spend a couple of hours every morning. I really try to make my life a prayer throughout the day because, as you said, we're living in apocalyptic times. We're living in crazy, crazy times, biblical. And so that to me kind of is the heart of my vocation. I feel like that's where God is calling me now, but even more so through this healing, I feel like when I'm praying, I feel like I can hear him differently. I can hear him better. I can I'm praying differently because the brain fog, I don't know if I mentioned brain fog earlier, but I remember going to church sometimes and I remember hearing the gospel and leaving mass and coming home, and an hour later, my one of the kids would say, "Oh, the God," and I would go, "What was the gospel about?" It's like it was gone. And so my prayer life now, I feel like I've gotten back this dialogue, where I can move mountains. I feel like I'm starting to experience that new beginning that your program has given me, because I wasn't hearing that way before. I wasn't praying that way before. And I feel like now I have a reason more so to pray, but to give him thanks, to glorify him through this program for who he is, and that we're going to need him in the times to come, because it's a crazy world. And I think of my kids and their kids and my grandkids and what it's going to be like for them. You have nothing to lose and everything to gain. I mean, I think first and foremost, um, if it's early onset, nip it in the bud before, unfortunately I had to wait 17 years, and God allowed that, and that's okay. But now that I know what I do, um, yeah, starting the program, it's revolutionary. It really is, because nobody's talking about it and nobody's acknowledging it. And so what you've stumbled across and what you've come across and what's healed you has the potential to change really the face of the world, of everything, because you can't live if you're not living in the truth. And I think it goes again to what I was saying. It's my life is more structured and ordered because of this diet and how I'm living. And so I think just living in the truth, Pam, in every aspect of a person's life, but they have nothing to lose, right? Yeah, you have nothing to lose and everything to gain. So I still can't believe that I still sometimes can't believe I found you and that I'm here talking to you, because it seems like a dream. I feel like sometimes I'm still in a dream like this. I'm going to wake up and I'm going to have the feeling like I'm hit by a truck and I'm here, and I'm not. So there's hope in a program like this. And there's no cost. There's nothing that could change my decision. No amount of money it was worth. And the weekly calls and the support you gave, and the support that every week that you gave, and the emails, and the repetitious, I felt like sometimes, okay, I'm sending another email and I'm kind of crying like a baby and whining, but and your smile and your faith and your hope, and I'm 50 and I feel like I'm living my best life. And I didn't think I'd ever be at this point, because I felt so horrible for 17 years. So, yeah, you have everything to gain and nothing to lose. The weekly calls and sharing your stories, with everybody, and hearing everybody's trials, everybody's successes, that was pivotal for me too, because it is a very lonely road and a lonely path when you don't have someone around you that has what you have. But discovering that it's not just MS, that it's all chronic diseases, I feel like I've been given almost it's a gift from God, but I feel like this understanding I have, now of the truth and of parasites and how they work. I mean, it really is astounding because there's a freedom. I guess that's a good way to put it. There's a freedom that I feel in all areas of my life. And I didn't feel that freedom 6 months ago until I found your program. So so hope, I just can't say enough about what your program offered. And it was like this hope just was resurrected in me to work. And it was work. It was work, but it was worth every minute of it because here I am. Thank you, Pam, for your hard work and your faith and everything you've done. I can't tell you how much I feel like you're a sister. You're a sister in Christ to me, and you're just a gift from God. And so I'm so grateful for this opportunity. I really, really am. So my prayers will remain with you.